You're confusing democracy with majoritarianism.
No, I'm not. Okay, look, there's no such thing as majoritarianism. There was no state ever created on Earth that was a majoritarianist. All right, you can't have a democracy without a constitution defining how the democracy will take place. You know, and it's going to include certain inalienable rights are always going to be articulated. Just point me to a democracy, a majoritarianism state. It's just never existed.
Well, some people would contend that the first Athenian model and some other early Greek city models were majoritarian, regardless of whether they were or not, or whether any state has been a majoritarian state. Irrespective of that, that is what you are proposing. It is not democracy. If everything is up for grabs by a popular vote. We'll go back to fundamental rights in a minute.
The reason for that is to protect the minority from the tyranny of the majority.
Yeah, well, there's no point in talking about it. I said a 75% majority. I mean, almost every constitution on earth could be amended by such a majority. So if such a majority has such a will, there's no constitution that can stand in their fucking way. You know, there's been no constitution written that cannot be amended or reconfigured by the population. It just doesn't work that way. It's never written in stone because it has to evolve to the circumstances people fucking live in. You know, so it's just impractical first off, and it's stupid to give me this fucking argument. It's a damn motherfucking democracy. If you don't like what 75% of people think, well, you're out of fucking luck. That's the world we live in, and that's the best system we have, and it beats the hell out of 25% telling 75% how they're going to live.
I am not arguing that the will of the majority should not be upheld in most cases in setting social policy or restricting the movements of people with disease or things like that, when you're talking about typhoid, Mary, and that. I am not arguing those cases. But here's the thing, Gary. The thing about fundamental, inalienable rights is that they are fundamental and inalienable. That means they are not subject to the vagaries of a populist vote. So you cannot vote to change those things. And one of those things is that the state cannot strap you to a table, slice open your nutsack and steal your family jewels, or cut you open and steal your womb. You cannot vote to have that done.
Yeah, okay, well, so now you've brought it up again, fine. So let's go over it again, alright? Yeah, I've argued that I think the safest place for humanity is eventually, in the future, virtual reality, because human beings can be the assholes that is their nature without there being any capacity to cause any real destruction. They can all be rapists and pillagers and abusers and slave owners and all the other crap they want to be. They can exploit things and people all they want in virtual reality without there being any real victims, any real cost. And I've made the argument that there's absolutely no way, no reason to create virtual reality, to make the expenditure and the investment in creating a safe environment for human consciousness if you're going to leave the same blight on the outside world.
And therein lies your difficulty, Gary. If the remaining 25%, the remaining billion people, decide that they don't want to go into your virtual reality, then you are proposing that their fundamental rights be disregarded, unless you think that not being harmed by the state is not a fundamental right. So which is it? do you think that the majority have the right to run roughshod over the human rights of others? If that is your philosophy, if your philosophy cannot even protect the basic fundamental human rights of every individual person, then, in my opinion, it is worthless. All your talk of sustainability, all your talk of equitable government, all your talk about ethical business practices and all the rest of it is for naught if you cannot even protect the basic fundamental human rights of every person. Can't you see?
But, you can't just let things happen. And so, from your perspective, doing nothing makes sense. From my perspective, that's the obscenity. I mean,
talking about a billion people could be sterilized. Be forced to suffer. That's not democracy, right?
well, yes, it is when there's 6 billion who say it's got to be. That's simple. And so you think that's a horror and that's suffering. Well, obviously from my standards, I don't see that as suffering. I don't feel tyrannized because I haven't reproduced. So fuck you. I mean, there's some point where it just becomes a fuck you argument because it's...
Yeah, well, that ended up having a certain Pavlovian predictability to it. Anyway. Nowhere have I stated that doing nothing was an option. So I don't know where the hell you're getting that from. And we're right back to inalienable rights again. So what do you think is an inalienable right? Do you think that people should be protected from being harmed by the state, from being forced against their will to suffer? Is that a fundamental right, or is it not? Now it appears that you don't think it is a fundamental right. Is that the case? Yes or no? And secondly, just because you don't feel tyrannized doesn't matter, because you don't want to have children. So how could you suffer? You don't want to have any kids. So it's not suffering on your part. That analogy doesn't work. And that brings me on to another thing about your analogies. The whole point of analogies is that they have to be analogous to the situation. So talking about Mary Mallon and about the authorities restricting her movements and forcing her to live in quarantine, that is not the same. That is not analogous to someone being strapped to a table and being operated on against their will. Mary Mallon was an imminent and actual threat to the very lives of people she was coming into contact with. That's not the same as 6 billion people wanting to live in a fantasy VR world and the possibility that maybe those outside could possibly fuck it up for them. Those two things are not analogous. They're not the same. Your analogies don't work. So, lay out what you think are fundamental rights. Maybe be a bit more clear about this. Lay out what you think are fundamental human rights. Or do you think there are such things? Then maybe we can make some headway. But according to your videos, according to your rants that I've seen on the Stickam, you think people should just be sterilised. Is that what you actually think? Or was that just something blurted out in the heat of the moment? Which was it? It matters either way. Okay?